I am hearing. It is your language. Old and echoing. And you know, friend, that when I falter, freeze in the face of this, we can't alter. It is all that I know to have changed in you. It makes me work harder.
Well, I think the biggest thing for any museum, regardless of whether it's Man in the Sea Museum or Undersea Museums, museums give us a part of our history, of where we came from.
There's a lot of history that has been accomplished here in Panama City, and nobody really knows about it. The museum is just a portion of what has gone on here in Panama City.
Our present chronicle begins in late 1963, when two Navy doctors, Captain George Bond and Commander Robert Workman, supervised Project Genesis, in which human beings remained in a highly pressurized chamber for 2 weeks. That they could do so with reasonable comfort and in perfect safety was a tribute to Bond's 8 years of research on the feasibility of breathing gas mixtures rather than normal air. He and Workman verified the usefulness of helium as a substitute for nitrogen to prevent the dangerous narcosis that high underwater pressures could cause. Let us now leap forward in time to midsummer 1964. The Office of Naval Research, inspired by Project Genesis, had designed a strange-looking capsule, the work of Lieutenant Commanders Roy Lanphier and Arthur Gross. It was nothing less than a laboratory for living men to observe themselves and their environment beneath the very waters of the sea. Can man indeed live within the sea as an inhabitant rather than a brief visitor? It takes a heap of logistics to bring the normal world into an abnormal place. But that, perhaps, is what exploration means. So imagine, if you can, all the planning and thinking, conferring and designing, research and construction that took place in the months and years before this particular Navy tug began to tow this unique orange capsule. The place, America's man-made structure called Argus Island, in the waters 30 miles southwest of Bermuda. The time, July 1964. The occasion, the proof of the pudding for Sea Lab 1. The protagonists, the U.S. Navy, in the persons of hundreds of scientists, technicians, engineers, divers, navigators, and auxiliary personnel. But 6 men in particular deserve the main focus of our attention. Take them in. George Bond, director of the Medical Research Laboratory of the submarine base in New London, Connecticut. Commander Roy Lanphier, and those, all selected by Captain Bond, who will enter the strange shape you see before you. Dr. Robert Thompson, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy, 36 years old, a native of Los Angeles. And 3 enlisted men of some special note, expert divers, all of them. Men as much at home underwater as men could be, up to the time. Robert Barth, Lester Anderson, Sanders Manning, Navy men in their 30s who were to be the human subjects of the Sea Lab experiment.
There's a lot of history that has been accomplished here in Panama City, and nobody really knows about it. A lot of the things you see here at this museum are things that have to do with underwater. Some of them are not necessarily involved in the diving whatsoever, the diving aspect of it, but I'd like to see Panama City really get into looking and seeing what, I'd like to have Panama City to tell people more what it is that's taken place in the history of diving here in Panama. It's a shame. There's been so much that's originated in this town, and yet little has ever been said about it. The only premier diving school in the whole United States is here. It's where divers go to get their training. Now, there are other shorter aspects, lesser degree of training schools in the military, but this is the only one. Personally, I'd like to see Panama City get a little more interested in what takes place in the military diving and regular diving here in Panama City. There's a lot of history that has been accomplished here in Panama City, and nobody really knows about it. A lot of the things you see here at this museum are things that have to do with underwater. Some of them are not necessarily involved in the diving whatsoever, the diving aspect of it, but I'd like to see Panama City really get into looking and seeing what, I'd like to have Panama City to tell people more what it is that's taken place in the history of diving here in Panama. It's a shame. There's been so much that's originated in this town, and yet little has ever been said about it. The Navy considers Panama City as one of the focal points of military diving. The only premier diving school in the whole United States is here. It's where divers go to get their training. Now, there are other shorter aspects, lesser degree of training schools in the military, but this is the only one that teaches all that we need to have taught to our people. The Navy Experimental Diving Unit is here. It's the only one like it in the world. It's been around for 80 some odd years, probably, maybe closer to 90. It's hard for me to say. I don't follow the thoughts of the people that run the city, the beach, the Chamber of Commerce, whatever. They seem to be interested in not the history of Panama City. There's a lady that writes for the newspaper, has been for years, tells you all about Panama City. Her article comes out, I think, every Sunday in the paper, and I'm ashamed to say I can't think of her name right now, but she writes about Panama City and goes back, way back when, talks about mayors, fire chiefs, sheriffs, and so forth. And that's interesting, and I'm so glad she does that. But we need to have more of that going, talk about Panama City. If Panama City's not interested in knowing about themselves, the people here are not interested, then we'll go back to what you said just a minute ago. They're more interested in spring break.
doing? My name is Michael Zinzer. I'm the director of the Advanced Science Diving Program at Florida State University. That is my paid position. And my volunteer position is president of the Institute of Diving, which operates and runs the museum, the Man in the Sea Museum. We're in the process of trying to bring the Man in the Sea Museum to the same status that the rest of the Bay County is moving towards. We're about a mile from Pier Park, and we are about 10-20 years behind Pier Park. We have a lot of work to do to catch up. I like to use the analogy that we're in a marathon, and we're still within the first mile of getting to where we need to be. The museum is a direct representation of Bay County and its history and its heritage and the people that live here. So I feel that it's important because of all the ocean research development that occurred in this area that the museum does stay here in Bay County. And what we need and what we want is Bay County to start taking ownership of their own history and heritage. Unlike many of the other historical monuments and a lot of the other really true historical facts of Bay County that have already disappeared, diving is still flourishing, growing, and much of the research is still conducted here in Bay County. So by letting the museum get in the condition that it is currently in, and not taking ownership of this museum, that's kind of denying not only our history, but turning our back towards what is an expanding industry in Bay County. And that's our goal, is to turn that around, to make the people here in Bay County understand the importance to knowing where you come from and preserving that history, because that's who we are. That's where we come from. Currently, obviously, if the biggest thing I've heard about the Man in the Sea Museum is I've drove past the Man in the Sea Museum 100 times. And I tell every person that says that if I had $1 for everyone that said that, we wouldn't be in the condition that we're in right now. So patronage and seeing what we have here is obviously a big part of raising funds. We have a nice gift shop, which again is a big part of raising funds, but that's barely enough to keep the doors open. You got to get past the metal building and really understand all the artifacts that are in this place and where they came from and who they came from. Now, what we need to do to really improve the exterior look and really showcase what we have here is corporate sponsorship. To sponsor individual exhibits, to sponsor events, to sponsor the museum itself. All areas we need, as well as membership. Membership is $35 a person for a year, and at $15 additional for each family member. And that gives you a free pass into the museum. It gives you our newsletter, what's going on in diving in the community. So that's what we need. That's direct actions that we can take that make a difference in keeping this museum open and moving forward to the direction that we want it to go into. That's the big stuff. Another thing that the Navy League is come on board with us, and they're sponsoring a golf tournament. So just the community coming together and coming up with ideas to say, hey, I have a way to make money to better show the museum and give them the funds they need to operate. Now, how much do we need? Well, we need as much money as it takes for this museum to represent Bay County properly. It can be a shed like we have currently, or it can be something that equals the Pier Park or any other the wonderful exhibits and beachfront locations we have here in town. So that's how much we're looking for, as much as it takes to get the job done properly.
name is Mike Ward, and I run a small company called Dive Lab here in Panama City, Florida. Well, I think the biggest thing for any museum, regardless of whether it's a Man in the Sea Museum or Undersea Museum, is museums give us a part of our history of where we came from. And as far as the diving world goes, diving, most people don't realize, is actually modern diving is relatively young. We've had divers diving with using compressed air since the mid 1800s, even earlier than that if you want to count taking air in a bell and lowering the bell down with weights and divers breathing compressed air in the bell. But modern diving as we know it today, modern surface supplied diving, especially the mixed gas diving, really started in the 1930s when they started using helium. And that all started in the Navy, and helium was a big breakthrough. And then it progressed on to lighter equipment, equipment that was better in cold water, better breathing performance, longer durations, and then of course turning into saturation diving, which only started in the late 60s. In addition, I mean, if you look throughout the United States, we don't really have a lot of diving museums. There's maritime museums, and there's a few that have diving equipment. But there's no central place in the United States where they have as much diving equipment history as they have right here in Panama City. They've got a little bit of everything, from the man-worn equipment to the whole evolution of what's happened in recent years as well as the old years of diving. I think right now Panama City, the Man in the Sea Museum, has more of that equipment than anywhere else.